What's the worst job you've ever had? Cutting fancy glass for use in mosaics. A glass cutter is basically a pen with a small metal wheel on one end and a metal ball on the other. Fancy glass is thick, heavy, expensive and sharp. The weight, thickness and texture changes drastically. One may be a 3 cm smooth green glass sheet, the next may be a texture 5 cm piece of orange. There is no training. Glass dust is a thing. My fingertips were swollen with tiny shards of glass and I broke much more glass that I was worth. It was a short gig. Yeah, frick that and any other job involved with glass. Dancing bear. I was a waiter at a kids restaurant, which had a bear as its mascot. The new guy had to be the bear on their first day, which meant putting on a massive bear costume over our waiter's uniform, including a huge fur head that you could barely see out of. You were then led around the place to wave at the parents and play with the kids, once per hour. If you spoke you were fired, as some of these kids were return customers who would recognize a waiter's voice. Wanting to impress my boss, I really hammed it up. I danced. I gestured. I goofed around. I sat on a mother's lap. I ruffled a father's hair while he growled, "Get off me or I'll stab you." The boss loved it so much that he made me be the bear every day I worked there, which would be great, except it was August, and so hot that the restaurant's aircon broke. The bear suit hadn't been washed in the history of the restaurant, so served as a memorial to the sweat of 100 fallen waiters. Little kids would run headfirst at the bear and headbutt my testicles with depressing regularity, and all it earned me was the disgust of my wait team, who thought I was goofing off work by being the bear, since it was clearly easier than carrying 2 plates of reheated lasagna across the room and refilling drinks. I thought you were talking about a different kind of dancing bear. Hotel housekeeping. If it comes out of the human body, I've cleaned it up. I started in a by-the-hour motel when I was 14, owned by a woman who didn't bother with hazardous waste procedure and cleaned up what looked like a murder scene with nothing but bleach and kitchen gloves. I walked into that room and was absolutely positive that when I pulled the shower curtain open there was going to be a body in the bathtub. Thankfully there wasn't, just blood everywhere. Owner refused to let me report it, made me clean it, and I didn't want to get in crap for bleaching a murder scene at 14, so I never did call the cops. The hotel owner definitely killed someone and made you clean it up. I've had crap jobs but nothing compares to this guy that called into a radio contest for worst job titles as his was chicken butthole remover. He stood on the slaughter line and made sure the carcasses were butthole free. If they weren't he was to fix it. Tell us why you want this job. Well, I've always been passionate about not eating chicken buttholes, so I figured I could do some good in the world. Just making sure one family doesn't accidentally consume chicken anus is enough for me. Probably working for a moving company. Everybody dreads moving day. For me that was every day. I liked it. New houses with new challenges and new people to charm out of tip money every day. I also got a nice workout. It was the illiterate, dipshit co-workers and scamming bosses that got me out of it. I sprinkled mud onto potatoes that had already been washed so that they would look freshly dug when they hit the supermarket. Most depressing holiday job I've had. Picking mangoes in Australia. Many people are unaware that if you snap off the stalk on a mango, poisonous sap flies out which makes you blister quite dramatically. Also the best job because of the beautiful scenery. Australia, where even the fruit can kill you. I worked at a slaughterhouse for a little while. They killed steers there but got pork shipped in. The hams came in a gigantic cardboard vat, probably 5 feet wide and 4 feet deep. They were heavily waxed on the inside to make them waterproof and had steel banding running around the outside kinned off like an old keg or barrel. Once we fished out most of the hams and trimmed them there was always a couple feet of blood at the bottom. As the new guy it was my job to dangle over the edge with a meat hook in one hand fishing for the remaining hams and scraps. Usually it was about an hour and shoulder deep blood with your face next to the surface. I don't think I have any right to complain about my past jobs now. I worked in an office, entry-level job after a career switch. My boss was a crazy woman, never happy, never satisfied, always changing her mind and blaming everyone else. One day she called me in her office and she gave me 2 projects, and got mad when I was asked her questions about how she wanted them. At the end of the meeting I asked her which one of these 2 you need first. Her. Both. I thought she misunderstood my question, so I repeated, which one of these two you need first? Her. Both. No, really, which one of these two you need first? Her. At this point she was yelling, both, 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 both. A few months later I had enough of her crap, and I went to HR to complain about her treatment of the staff. Of course she had a friend in the HR department and she got wind of it. She called me in her office and she complained to me about me complaining about her. And she told me, "You don't complain here, you leave." That was my clue. I called my headhunter and found myself a new better job, with better pay. A few years later, after I had built my career and I was actually ahead of her in responsibility and position, I met her at a conference and she was giving false praise how I was one of the best workers she ever had, and then rhetorically asked me why I left in front of people. I told her that I had to thank her for my career since she was the one who suggested I left by telling me, "You don't complain here, you leave." She really didn't like that. LOL. Revenge is sweet. Door-to-door solar panel salesman for a corrupt home energy company. Nothing better than knocking on someone's front door right in the middle of a Patriots game. I did door-to-door for home renovations, windows, doors, siding, etc. right after the 2008 market crash. I can't tell you how many people told me they weren't going to be able to make their next mortgage payment, let alone spend $20K on new windows. Soul crushing. Internship at a public relations firm in college. Was promised agency experience, writing opportunities, and valuable experience. Turns out what they actually meant was sitting in a room for 8 hours cold calling CEOs from an outdated call list and trying to trick them into a sales presentation. Might I add, about a month into the job they hired a new intern manager, who was the epitome of Massachusetts trash. Drove to work every day from the Cape on his Holly, 2+ hours one way, lauded his degree from Bunker Hill Community College, chain smoked, and EJ'd on the side at trash North Shore nightclubs. He insisted on sitting in the room with us for 8 hours to check if we were actually making calls, all while berating us for being poor employees and cheap labor. On my last day of the internship, he called me into his office and told me, "The only reason you are still here is because we didn't have to pay you. You'll never be successful like me. You're not cut out for the business world. If I were you, I would drop out and try to find a trade you'll succeed in." Even as a 19-year-old, I knew an idiot when I saw one. I looked him square in the eye and said, "You can go frick yourself," and walked out with the other interns. He then wrote a letter of complaint to my school to try and have my internship credit revoked. But luckily my advisor knew the situation and cut him out. Dan the DJ, if you're reading this, I want you to know I took your advice and did my best to never become you. Being poor means being willing to do fricked up things for tiny bits of money, so I've had more sucky jobs than I can count. But the one that stands out to me most is door-to-door political fundraising canvassing. This was back in the early 90s. The way it worked was you had a clipboard, a pen, a petition, and some envelopes. The whole crew would meet at the office and then pile into the 15-passenger van. The supervisors would drive us out to a territory, turf, anywhere from 10 minutes to hours away from the office. Then, they would divide us into pairs and give each pair of canvassers a map marked with the pair's assigned turf. If I recall correctly, we started knocking on doors around 3 o'clock or 4 p.m. and kept at it until 8 o'clock. In that time, we were supposed to knock on people's doors and talk to them about whatever issue we were working on at that point. When I did my brief stint, it was nursing home reform legislation. Then, we were supposed to get the occupant to sign our petition and make a contribution, preferably check or charge, on the spot. Our nightly quota was $120. If you think that people hate having telemarketers call their houses at dinner time to ask them for money, just imagine how much they love it when those same telemarketers show up unannounced on their front doorsteps. Between crappy weather, vicious dogs, seaheads and tweakers answering the door, people's pervasive hatred of trespassers and solicitors, and constant fear of being fired for missing my quota, field canvassing was definitely one of the worst jobs I've ever had. I've had this job, pretty bad. Destroys the soul. I worked at a used car lot for about a month my first summer home from college. Pay decent and under the table. The summer of 2001 I was getting paid $15 HR. which was awesome for a college kid looking to save up for beer money in the fall. I was the lot boy and prepped the cars that were sold, charged up the batteries on the ones that had been sitting for a while, and picked up lunch for the sales team. Overall, it wasn't bad, but the work was tedious in the sun and the people that I worked with were an odd sort. Sales guy 1. When he wasn't selling used cars, he was a bouncer door guy at a third-rate strip club. He would borrow our high-end SUVs to drive escorts on the weekends without the boss knowing. He would have me put dealer plates on them after the owner left on Saturday afternoons. Sales guy 2. This was peak rap rock era and dressed and acted like a Fred Durst clone. Bragged about how he had multiple girlfriends and would make them bring him food at alternating times. One afternoon the lunch schedule got crossed and we had a trashy girl fight that would have been successful to our public freakout. Office manager, former girlfriend of sales guy 1 and sales guy 2, who retired from dancing to go straight. She still escorted on the weekends though. Processed finance applications and did the cash drops at the bank. Owner, paid everything in cash, and specialized in selling cars for US below $10K. Every Friday we had a customer who would come in and co-sign on a crappy Nissan Altima with $80K on it and would pay in cash. Always from NY or North Jersey. I just assumed they were engaging in narcotics or human trafficking. Mechanic, quiet guy, kept to himself and would listen to classic rock all day. After about a week he told me was happy for the job as he had been away for a while. He was good about showing me how to work on engines, and we would hang out in the garage drinking Miller High Life out of paper cups. Dude loved Steely Dan. After about a month, I noped right out of there. While the pay was good, the ongoing drama of the people I worked with wasn't enough to hang around. Sales guy 2 had just gotten arrested on the lot for failing to pay child support, and I knew I was just a few days away of being guilty by association of something. I don't know why, but this is my favorite story from this thread. Something about the visuals of the mechanic drinking beer and other undesirable individuals behaving in undesirable ways, with a young kid sort of all trapped in the middle of it before he escaped back to college, is all sort of endearing to me. Great story. I was a furnace helper in steel factory. We made bumper mounts and hinges for trucks, hoods and other heavy steel parts. I unloaded red hot parts from the furnace with a pair of tongs. I used to catch fire 2 or 3 times a day. I hated that. I used to catch fire 2 or 3 times a day. I hated that. This part got to me. You say it like it's commonplace to catch fire at your job, then had to further point out that you didn't like catching on fire. That is a horrible job. Dealer in a casino. You learn a lot about different games and get to play cards all shift. You also make some pretty good coin with tips and whatnot. However, you get to meet some of the worst people on the planet. When people start losing money at your table, several hundred to several thousand at a time, suddenly that fun atmosphere becomes soul-suckingly tense, to the point of you better hope you're not walking alone when you're off tonight. But you get to call your pit boss over and say, this patron just threatened me. Boom, booted out of the casino, banned for 6 months to a year and possibility of criminal charges. Sometimes, I got a nice justice boner working there. My friend was a sick bow dealer. She has a striking look that is very recognizable. One night she went out and ate orange chicken and became violently ill. The next week a man sat at her table, asked how her meal was and then laughed maniacally. After that she wouldn't even set foot in Chinatown for fear or player retaliation. Worked for UMG straight out of high school processing CD orders. It was still a thing back then. I was 17, the only guy in the office, working with nothing but 40-plus-year-old women. Sweet Jesus, the raunchiest conversations that led me to discover the definition of TMI. The work was fine, just data entry, and I had a massive backlog when I arrived. In the first week I cleared it all out and no one in the office had anything to do, including myself. I couldn't browse the web. I brought a book into the office and was reading it, got yelled at by my supervisor for it. I explained that I had nothing to do and sitting around staring at nothing for 8 hours a day was torture. What about our backlog? It's gone. That can't be true. Well, go check for yourself. Comes back. Well, okay. If you have nothing to do, come talk to me. After a week of coming to her every hour on the hour asking for something to do, and her saying she had nothing, she yelled at me again for bugging her. They eventually fired me for refusing to come in 10 minutes prior to my scheduled time. unpaid, and logging into the phones. There was nothing going on and I sure as crap was not going to sit around doing nothing for one more minute then I had to, much less unpaid. Close second was many years later I was brought in to package software for a company that had bought another company, get it up to their standards, make sure it installed silently, etc. They didn't have a place for me to sit so they put me in an unheated warehouse, in the winter, with massive bay doors that open up 4-6 times a day for deliveries. After working there for a month I still didn't even have a computer to work on. After a month I got a computer but there was nothing for me to do still. It took me a week to track down my manager after this point and he said that they wouldn't have work for me for a few more months. Aren't you lucky? You get to do nothing and collect a paycheck, he said to me. Yeah, real lucky. Then they brought on another guy for some reason to do the same job. We were both incredibly confused to say the least. After another month and having read about 24 books I just stopped showing up. Submitted my time and checked my email every day to see if there was any work to do as well as sent weekly emails asking if there were any tasks coming my way soon to my manager. Finally after 2 months they caught on and let me go. I didn't feel bad about it in the slightest. Can't believe roofing isn't on here. That is absolutely the freaking worst. Pretty much like being a human egg on a griddle all day with a side order of humping shingles around and trying not to fall and break your neck. I was a cashew flicker at a candy factory. Literally, I flicked the bad cashews off a conveyor belt. Managed a local restaurant. Worked 10 to 12 hour days. Often with closing and leaving at 1 AM only to be back to open at 8 AM. 6 days a week with an 8 AM meeting on my only one full day off. Frick that. Talk about soul sucking. Pyramid scheme selling Kirby vacuums for in-house demonstrations. Got out of that within couple weeks. I took a job with a marketing company working at the mall trying to get people to take surveys. Literally hundreds of people walked right by, refusing to make eye contact with me. It was like being a ghost. Horrible job. Hated every second of it. I quit after 6 hours. That's crappy. It's not that nobody wanted to talk to you though. It's just that no one likes to do surveys. Lifeguard. It was hours upon hours of boredom intermingled with seconds of sheer terror. Glorified cleaners. Spent most of my time cleaning changing rooms and toilets with a bit of time on poolside doing jack all. In 4 years there was one rescue when I was on shift, and I was mopping the floor in reception. I actually didn't take the job, but it would have been the worst by far. I applied for a position in an industrial bakery as a sanitation technician. As advertised, the job would entail disassembling, cleaning, and reassembling equipment. But when I showed up for my interview, really an informal orientation, the nice lady told me I would actually be standing at one end of a conveyor belt and given one simple task, to pick up trays of bread coming off the conveyor belt, rotate them 90 degrees, and place them on a different conveyor belt. For the entire duration of my 12-hour overnight shift, it would have nearly doubled my pay, but I just could not do it. I put my little hat back on and went back to rolling burritos. Even in the darkest, most horrible open to close days of my time at the burrito restaurant, I would console myself with the thought of that job and how much worse things could be. The fact that their machinery isn't designed to do that without human intervention is mind-boggling. Working at a music store, rather, instruments. All day there is at least one guy who is playing his first concert for everyone in the store. He has the most expensive guitar hooked up to the loudest amp while he sausage fingers through the intro to Sweet Child O' Mine. At the counter is a customer upset because the electric guitar he just purchased exploded when he plugged the 1-stroke 4 jack into the wall socket in his living room. This actually happened. In the drum room there's a group of teenagers doing their best to play a blast beat they heard Pickles talk about in a Metalocalypse Ray run. At the counter there is a drummer for a church band that is placing an order for a 18 inches deep snare rhythm shell. The keyboard area has a mentally challenged kid doing his best Wesley Willis impression by using the play along function of a crappy Casio keyboard. His parents think it's great, The older jazz pianist is dissatisfied with the new electronic keyboards because they don't sound like my Steinway. At the counter is an aspiring producer trying to convince the salesman to teach him to use the software since he can't refund it now that it's registered to his iLock key. In the DJ room there's one kid who thinks he is deadmau5 by literally just playing a deadmau5 CD. There's another kid who's asking for a record needle and demo vinyl so he can try scratching. Record needles are about $60 to $120 each, so no, none of them have any idea what a DJ mixer is. In the pro audio area there's an old guy who did some roadie work in the 80s and he's arguing with the salesman over the price being higher than what it was 35 years ago. There's another customer looking to buy sound reinforcement for his church, but he's haggling over getting a better price for Jesus despite the fact that he already won't be paying tax on the items. At the counter is a man angry that the microphone he bought doesn't work without a cable or a speaker to plug it into. This actually happened. Then there's the people buying sheet music and hardware for their orchestral instruments. They're generally pretty chill, if a little weird. Usually they just want reeds. While he sausage fingers through the intro to Sweet Child O' Minutes. At least it isn't Stairway to Heaven. Wait, I bet he did that too. Currently in retail sales and it is soul sucking. If I didn't know I was leaving soon I don't think I'd even be able to get out of bed in the morning. This is one of the reasons I left my retail job as well. I found myself dreading the thought of waking up on bank holidays and weekends as well as being verbally abused by customers with a know-it-all complex. You've encountered the lost treasure of Captain Gus Fishhead. Subscribe to receive some of his gold. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.